But the pursuit of profit can also cause dysfunctions. Increasing inequality leaves some unable to find a decent job, struggling to survive, while the supply of wealth becomes concentrated at the top, encouraging concentration on luxury goods. Increasing profit means cutting costs, which may mean cutting worker pay, increasing prices, and even polluting and endangering health. Government regulations can help stop the worst abuses, but like discrimination, they may continue in more subtle ways. The motivation to produce more and more cheaply is increased by the need to sell as many goods as possible, motivating not necessarily long-lasting quality, but planned obsolescence. Finally, since competition for consumers requires advertising, companies spend a huge amount of money on media. While this pays for much of our mass media, it also begs the question whether the best products really win, or just the ones with the best advertisements. Workers also may lose their jobs and businesses stop being able to produce when the market itself crashes. This may happen because banks lent money too easily, driving up cost through inflation since people seemed able to pay more, until interest rates on those loans made them impossible to pay back and the banks themselves went bankrupt. Bigger business can produce more and sell more cheaply and advertise to more customers until they buy up and destroy smaller businesses. While monopolies, one company dominating a market, were banned by regulation starting in 1890, an oligopoly of a few companies can still leave consumers and workers without much choice in who to buy from and work for. Competition requires consumers having a choice in what to buy, but when nearly everything at the grocery store is actually produced by an oligopoly of corporations joined in massive conglomerates, there's little incentive for any one company to increase quality or worker pay, or to decrease product cost, since they all make more profit if there are no better options. The socializing effects of the media, influencing economic, political, and cultural values generally, are also controlled increasingly by an oligopoly, earning most of its profit by advertising for the biggest powers in other industries. Karl Marx, inspiration for the conflict approach to sociology, saw these issues not as dysfunctions of capitalism, but its very nature. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, he said that the proletariat, workers who produce everything that society needs, would always be exploited by the bourgeoisie, owners of the factories and other means of production, who would grow ever wealthier because they had the power over the job and consumer market. Their influence in government would create laws that protect their property and status, while school and media would teach the dominant ideology that social mobility is a meritocracy, so those at the top must have worked their way up, while those at the bottom suffer for their own culture of poverty. Marx thought workers in industrial capitalist systems would develop class consciousness and create a worldwide communist society. The Russian people suffered under the worst of an agricultural estate system and beginnings of an industrial class system, so they followed revolutionary leaders inspired by Marx to create the world's first socialist state, followed by many others. But they never developed into Marx's ideal communist society where workers controlled their own fate. Instead, state leaders took authoritarian power to command the economy, to ideally produce and distribute goods equally, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But economic growth was slow, political opponents were oppressed, sometimes involving mass murder, and at times the state's efforts to produce needed goods failed. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the market became more open, and some benefited greatly, while others suffered. When Bulgaria left the Soviet Union and their economy entered the free market, some said that all the dreams of communism were lies, but all the warnings about capitalism were true. China's revolution produced many of the same problems, but they reformed their economy by freeing the market somewhat, while retaining an authoritarian state to help produce great economic benefit for some, while oppressing or abandoning others. Cuba has been more successful, despite a long-term trade embargo by the United States, our own government having power in international markets, with high literacy and life expectancy, low poverty and inequality. Yet, slow growth and political repression have troubled Cuban lives as well, and they have recently begun to open up their markets. Neither system seems to be perfect, as economic failures and some form of inequality have always occurred. Every actual society has some mixture of the free market and command economy, and the countries that have done best have been those that found the right mix of individual freedom and motivation, state help and regulation. Most Americans recognize some problems in America's especially individualistic capitalism, but few would want a Soviet-style socialism either. To understand potential changes in our economy, we have to look back at our history a bit. In pre-industrial societies, that meant a lot of physical labor, so many people worked in the first or primary sector of the economy, getting material resources from nature, either by hunting and gathering or through farming, mining, logging, and so on. Most people had just enough to survive. Luxury and foreign goods were only available to a small social elite who held on to their power by closing social mobility. In industrial systems, it becomes easier to gather, move, and use resources, so more and more people work in the blue-collar, secondary sector of the economy, turning those resources into things like shoes, cars, and microwave dinners. Machines made it easier to produce more stuff than ever before, but it still takes a lot of work. So the question is, who's going to get this stuff, and who's going to do all the work? The United States is producing far less industrial goods than it was 50 years ago, yet we have more stuff than ever before. More and more of our stuff is being produced by either automated machines and people in other countries in the globalized economy. We are moving into a post-industrial economy, where most people work in the pink or white-collar third, or tertiary sector, providing not material things, but services, such as working with people and information. As more and more work gets done by machines, computers, and people in other countries, what happens to the people who used to get paid to do those jobs? Could we create an abundance economy in which people live without full-time work? After all, there's always been important jobs that got done without money changing hands, as part of the informal economy, which also includes illegal goods and services in the black market. In a society where production takes a lot of resources and work, it seems natural to have to compete in the job market for unequal wages to afford the things you want. But could modern technologies and internet communication actually make work less necessary and competition in the market more equal? 3D printers make small-scale production cheaper and nearly effortless. Connecting with people online opens up many new opportunities to bypass expensive traditional ways of running a business, such as taking classes, borrowing money, buying advertising, and renting retail space. Easy access to online resources opens up the market to everyone. Right now, any website you visit transmits relatively equally, meaning a customer can use your site as easily as they can use Walmart's. Yet even this system of net neutrality depends on some government regulation of internet service providers, who could be making extra profit by charging websites for faster user access. In the next lesson, we'll look at the political side of this complex equation.